What's going on, ladies? Different greeting than I normally give, but back up. I'm married. You shall not commit adultery. It is written. But today is going to be for you, ladies. Why? You don't need no man to be carrying a gun, to be a shooter, to be a good shooter, to be armed. You don't need a man for that. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a man. I'm just saying they're not mutually exclusive. Like, you don't need a man in your life for you to have a gun in your life, or guns in your life, or to be a shooter. This is primarily for women. Likely many men will listen because that's the majority of my audience. And men, if you're listening, there'll be some nuggets in here for you as well. With that, men, if you're a normal listener, maybe share this with a woman you think should hear it. And since it will be shared with likely, hopefully, many new listeners, I'm going to put in the bio to establish some bona fides, to establish some street cred, as younger kids might say, because why should you listen to me? Not because I have a microphone, right? Anybody can buy a microphone. It's like $70 on Amazon. Not because I have a podcast. Tons of people have podcasts. Tons of people have YouTube entertainment channels that are what I would call gun entertainment, where they like shoot watermelons and stuff, and that's all fun and good. But that doesn't mean you should view them as an expert on firearms. Why should you listen to what I have to say? Well, for that, I'm going to put in the bio. If you want to skip it, skip around 2 minutes, or 4 taps on the fast forward button on many apps. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other 3-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast, and elk and bear and wolf, and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now, those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder. Certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life, and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie, where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young, good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength. It's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. Now, ladies, you have every right to be armed, right? The Second Amendment does not say the right of hairy-chested men. They're in there too, right? I'm a hairy-chested man. But it's a human right, and you have every right to be armed. And you probably, sadly, this is a bad thing, but I want to deal with reality and what is, not what we wish would be. Women are likely, and look up the stats for yourself on this. I'm not going to do a deep dive. That will be its own episode. But look up the stats of women being the victim of a violent crime versus men being the victim of a violent crime. You are probably way more likely to be the victim of a violent crime than a man is. So you probably should be armed. Now, I wouldn't say more, because I think a man has a responsibility to protect those around him. But every bit as much, you should be armed, I think, to protect yourself, to protect those under you, right? You have little children or other people around you. So you have just as much right to be armed. And, thankfully, I think a lot of women have woken up to this. But they have awakened. I've been a firearms instructor a long time. When I first started professional firearms instruction, not as like part of the military, but as part of teaching civilians, it was largely men that were concealed carriers, that were armed, that were taking the classes. And now it's not. Now, in many civilian classes, there is a really good ratio. It's not like 10-1 males to females. It's a pretty good mix of male and female. That's fantastic. Again, because you have every right to be armed. Don't think that somehow you are not going to be as good at shooting. And in fact, this is my anecdotal evidence, but I've been a firearms instructor a long time. I'd have to look at my certificate, but it predates this. But my FBI certificate, I think, might go back to 2009 or 2010 to give you an idea. If you give me a class of students, I think, and this is anecdotal, in general, I can have the women shooting better, faster than the men. And I recently went through a course. I was a student in this course. You're never too good for the basics. But anyway, I went through a course, and one of the guys that struggled the most was a big, burly dude. I mean, he might have been a few pounds shy of double what I weigh. He's a big dude, big, former embassy Marine. I mean, he was a big, imposing character. He had the most trouble shooting. And after the first day of our course, which is a pretty intense course, he said, "Man, I'm sore." And he's a big dude that works out a lot. And one of the things I told him, because after the first day of being a student, I kind of got moved into an instructor role to help teach the other students, which was not really why I was there, but I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to help. And one of the things I told him was, handgun shooting is mostly about finesse. It's mostly about finesse. You can be big and strong, but you don't need to muscle that gun. One of the things that I often say, and I said in this class, was maybe not verbatim, but something like this. That gun doesn't care how you feel. That gun doesn't care about you at all. That gun is a machine that's going to do what it's going to do. So whether you're super tense in anticipation and really uptight and trying to muscle that gun, or you're completely relaxed and enjoying it, that gun's going to do the same thing. So you might as well relax and enjoy it. Because being relaxed, being alert, and having some finesse on that gun is going to aid you, is going to make you shoot better, not worse. What is it? Let's take a fairly heavy gun. What does an AR-15 weigh? Hopefully not more than 8 pounds, and that's a big one. That's a heavy one. I prefer them in the 6 to 6, 7, 6, even less than 6 is even better for me. That lightweight range, right? That's not a lot of weight. 6 pounds, that's nothing compared to what most weightlifters lift. Or look at a handgun. You're talking 40 ounces for a 40-something ounces for a heavy 1911, a metal-on-metal 45 caliber gun. You talk about a Glock or a SIG 320, you're talking in the 20-ish ounces for a Glock 17, a Glock 19, 20-something ounces. That's not a lot. You don't need to be strong to shoot a gun, and you don't need to be strong to shoot a gun well. Sorry, men. You should be strong, because being strong is important too, but for a different reason. Don't think that there's a direct correlation between being super strong and muscly and being a good handgun shooter. In fact, there's Probably no correlation at all. Other than this, if you, and it's not an immediate correlation, but if you're consistent in working out and exercise and you're disciplined in that, because there'll be plenty of days when you don't want to do it and you do it anyway, you'll likely be disciplined in shooting, because shooting is like any other skill. If you want to get good at it, you should practice it. So there's a direct correlation that way, as in if you're consistent in working out and you apply that to shooting, you'll be good. But it's not like if I look at a dude, again, he was the biggest, strongest dude in our class. He also had the most trouble in shooting, and he was still a good shooter. Don't get me wrong. This was a course for already established, really good shooters. But he was the biggest, strongest dude there. He's a great dude too, and I loved helping him out. But that just goes to show you there's no direct correlation. I could have literally, and it depends on the girl, but I could have literally had a 12-year-old girl and taught her to shoot just as good or better in the same amount of time. Again, because shooting, especially handgun shooting, is a lot about finesse. What does that gun weigh? 20-something ounces? What does a trigger weigh? Even a really bad garbage trigger like a Glock. You're talking 6.5 pounds, right? You probably pull a 6.5 pound trigger. And this next one is mostly for men out there, because this is a myth that I would just like to just kick in the shins. Just this myth just really ticks me off. When men in a woman's life that are trying to advise them on guns, or gun store owners or whatever, say that a semi-automatic handgun or whatever is too complicated for a woman. What a slap in the face. What an insult to women. Let me ask you this. This is for men right now. Let me ask you this, men. Does that woman in your life drive an automobile? Think about the complexity of an automobile versus a handgun. Look at how many moving parts are in a Honda Civic versus a handgun. Look at how hard it is to maneuver, control, and drive a vehicle versus a handgun. They're both machines. They both have levers and knobs and this and that, and a handgun has far less. Handgun is unloaded. To load a handgun, you put rounds in magazine, you put magazine in gun. You rack slide. Gun is now loaded. To unload semi-automatic handgun, remove magazine, rack slide. Handgun is now unloaded. It's not rocket science, man. You might want to think that I'm a man and I got a firm grasp on this super complicated thing that is handgun shooting. I just told you how to load and unload a handgun in a couple of seconds. Now I can tell you how to be right now. If you've ever listened before, perk up and listen now. I can tell you how to be an expert handgun shooter in probably less than 10 seconds. I can tell you how to be an expert handgun shooter in less than 10 seconds. It's not complicated. Okay, ready? Listen. Put the sights on target. Hold them there until after the shot goes off and the bullet leaves the barrel. Done. If you do that every single time, you will be an expert handgun shooter. All right? It's simple, yet very difficult. Lots of things are simple and very difficult. It's simple for me to tell you how to bench press 400 pounds. Put 400 pounds on the rack, lower it to your chest, lift it up again. Ta-da! You just bench press 400 pounds. It's simple. It's not easy. It's simple for me to tell you how to run a marathon. Likely you know how to run, right? So just do that for 26.2 miles. I just told you how to run a marathon. Super, super simple. Not easy. Handgun shooting is simple. We tend to overcomplicate it. We tend to make it like it's all this thing and this thing and that thing and that thing. And there are certainly different things you can do to improve, but at its core, it's a simple process, but very difficult. To have an explosion occur right in front of your face and to not move and to just relax and let it happen and put the sights back on target and hold them there while you have an explosion in front of your face. It's easy to say that. It's very difficult to do it in real life consistently. And plus, we're not machines. You don't hold everything exactly perfect and do everything you're supposed to do all the time. But is there anything in that process that I described that you don't think a woman can do? I hope not, men. I hope that there's nothing that I just described in that process that you think is too complicated for a woman. And there is a thing where, unless you're talking about a really elderly woman or a really young girl, women have trouble racking a slide. That's probably because either you're showing them the wrong technique or somebody else is showing them the wrong technique. You're not supposed to pinch a slide with 2 fingers and pull it back with your hand and let it go. If you're a big, strong dude, you can do that. But even for a big, strong dude, you probably shouldn't. What you should do is, and this is probably better viewed in a video, but grab the firearm in a full firing grip like you're going to shoot it with your firing dominant hand, and reach up and grab the slide with the entire, all 5 fingers, your 4 fingers and your thumb of your less dominant hand, your support hand. Grab the entire top of the slide, push, pull. Push with your entire arm, shoulder, body with your right hand, and pull with your left hand if you're right-handed, with all that force. Most firearms, unless you're talking about something crazy, most common semi-automatic handguns, and most females, even 12-year-old girl and up, can do that. Again, men, don't be thinking that you need to be some giant hulk of a man to be able to rack the slide on a handgun. If you have trouble racking the slide on a handgun, it's probably your technique. Or there's some other factor. You have arthritis or something like that. Those factors do exist. But for a healthy woman, 12 years old to 70 years old, should be able to rack a slide if you do it properly. And you're not trying to sit there and pinch it with fingers and do this and do that. It's a technique thing. And it's not hard. I'm not going to say it's not hard. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. So stop it with this myth that, these semi-automatic handguns are super complicated and you got to have a master's degree in engineering to run a handgun. You don't. And women can be just as good, if not better, handgun shooters than men for many reasons. In general, they have a lot less bravado. So even a man that doesn't really know much about handguns or handgun shooting, I don't mean they've shot a handgun a lot. I mean they've had professional, real-world instruction. Even men that don't have that, they show up to training courses with, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times with bravado, thinking, I know what I'm doing. Just because you have male genitals doesn't mean you popped out of your mom's womb knowing how to shoot a handgun. It's not how that works. Just because you're a man doesn't make you a good handgun shooter. Women tend to not have that assumption. They tend to be more open-minded when you're trying to actually teach them. And here's a tip. If you go, unless the instructor tells you to do something unsafe, if you go to a handgun course, myself included, if they tell you to do something, try your best to do what they're telling you. You can decide later whether or not that technique is better or worse than what you're doing, but you're paying them to teach you, so learn. If you go there thinking that you know everything, you're probably not going to learn anything. Crazy how that works. But women tend to not have that bravado and think, I know what I'm doing. They tend to actually listen, which is a good thing. Women also tend to have good fine motor skills. And again, shooting a handgun is much about finesse. Much about finesse. And women are good at finesse. A lot better than men, usually, at finesse. Here is another thing, women, that is good about you guys. When a man gets frustrated, he tends to try and overpower the problem, muscle the problem. And sometimes that's a great thing, right? If you're getting your head beat into the pavement, that's a good reaction. If you're trying to loosen a rusted bolt, many times that can be a good reaction, that kick in of testosterone, and you just crank it. Like, that can be a good reaction sometimes. That's generally the opposite of what you want when you're shooting. If you try and muscle something, especially a handgun, because you're getting frustrated, you will often shoot worse, not better. Again, shooting is about finesse. Holding that firearm, rifle, handgun in place and pulling a 5.5-pound trigger does not require a ton of testosterone and muscle. You might think that, like, oh yeah. And a lot of good shooters do have a lot of testosterone and muscle. But that's because the rest of their job. That might be the rucking, carrying a big heavy pack 20 miles to get there so you can shoot for 30 seconds. That requires a lot of muscle, but the actual act of shooting doesn't. So don't be fooled into thinking that it does. Ladies, you can shoot every bit as good as far as the fundamentals of shooting go. I've seen nothing in my career that says as far as the fundamentals of shooting go, you can't be just as good as a man. Now, this might not be the cool hip thing to say, but it's true, so just deal with it. If you came here for politically correct stuff, turn this off and go watch The View or something. I don't know. But Men are stronger than women, physically. In general, period. You could find me an exception, but I could probably find you a healthy thing on the McDonald's menu. But in general, if I say McDonald's is not super healthy food, you would agree with that. If I say in general, men are physically stronger than women, that should not even be a controversial thing. There are other aspects of shooting, like practical shooting, where a man can excel. Again, if you're sprinting in shooting, which a lot of practical shooting is, men sprint faster than women. Go look at the Olympics. It's a thing. Sorry. But not sorry for saying it. That's just how it is. But as far as the fundamentals of shooting go, women, you can be every bit as good as a man at the fundamentals of shooting. Again, a rifle is not that heavy, but you might get tired faster than a man does if you're doing long courses of fire, and that's a real thing. But again, women, you can be great shooters, and there are a lot of really great women shooters. In fact, there have been a lot of really great women snipers throughout history, especially the Russians. They have historically done a really good job at that. So we've established, or at least I've told you, you can do your own research. You should never just listen to me because I'm talking. Do your own research. But women, you have the right to be armed. If you live in America, I mean, if you live somewhere else, you have the right. It's just been taken away. You have the right to be armed. You have the ability to be a good shooter. You have the intellectual and physical capability, unless you have some oddball detriment, to run most modern firearms. Period. And you can be every bit as good a shooter at the fundamentals as a man. And I think if you do your own research, you'll find that women are more likely to be the victim of a violent crime. Now, here's another thing that's not real popular that I'm going to say, you're just going to have to deal with it, is that we live in a very strange time as far as history goes. Historically, women have been under the headship, the protection of a man, pretty much period, right? They were under the protection of the father. Then they got married and they were under the protection of a husband. That is not the culture and society that we live in. You might be in that stage, women, as a yuppie. And I don't mean that disparagingly, but yuppie stands for young urban professional. You could be out doing your own thing, your own career. My wife has her master's degree. When I met her, she was living a yuppie life. Now, before I met my wife, a little story. I don't often talk about my wife on the podcast, but she's the number one woman in my life. She had a firearm. And when I met her, I was like, oh, she's got a gun. That's great. She had a firearm. She had good taste in firearms. I went. It was by her bed. I said, well, let's see if this gun's loaded. I checked, round in the chamber. I was like, good to go. She doesn't just have this gun to feel good, like some kind of tactical teddy bear. Like, I have it, and it's gonna make me feel good. Okay, that's what it is, a tactical teddy bear. And a lot of men have those. Men are horrible for this. They have a gun, or they have a bunch of guns, and they think, I've got all these guns. I'm ready. Those guns don't mean anything. They're hunks of metal if you can't run them, and if you can't get them into action quick enough, fast enough. They're just things to be pawned if you need cash, or things to sell if you want to buy something else. But they're not actually life-saving tools unless, one, you can run them, two, you can get them into action to be used in a timely manner. But going back to, women used to be generally under the headship of a man. They had hopefully a good, God-fearing, loving father. Then they had a good, God-fearing, loving husband to take care of them. That's sadly not the case very often. Even for men, right? I grew up from a broken home. I'm from a broken home. The bastard son of a single teenage mother. There wasn't a man around really growing up in the house to protect us. And that just, a lot of times, again, I like it or not, that is a big thing in Western culture and society today. A lot of broken homes and a lot of women out on their own. And again, women, you're more likely, I think, to be the victim of a violent crime. So you really should give some consideration to being armed. If you have the right and you have the ability, and you have the potential risk of actually needing it, why would you not be armed? Now, you may have a reason, but you judge that for yourself. I'm not here to tell you that every woman should be armed. I'm not even here to tell you that every man should be armed. I don't think every man should be armed. And some of my male listeners will gasp at that. But like, what if I'm a veteran? A lot of veterans are suicidal. If I have a good friend who just got out of the military and he's suicidal, probably being armed right at that time is not the best choice for him. Right? Not every man should be armed. There are certain reasons. But start with, do you have the right? Do you have the ability? Do you have a potential need for it? And I'd say that's pretty much a yes everywhere. And are you willing to take on that responsibility? Because being a gun owner and being a gun carrier comes with some responsibility. And you should judge that for yourself too, right? If you know yourself, if you've got a bunch of little small children and you forget stuff all the time and you think you're just going to leave your handgun in your purse, maybe not, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with carrying a handgun in a purse, I don't think, if you don't have small kids around, and you don't often have small kids in your life. Again, you're in that yuppie phase, that young urban professional phase. You're in your mid-20s and you're out and about, and there aren't really any kids that are going to get into your purse, and an adult should know better. If they're in your purse, they're probably stealing. You get the idea, but judge for yourself whether it's right or wrong for you. Another thing I want to get into is for women. I've been a firearms instructor a lot of years, and this is not unique to women, but more common with women. I've just seen it. And it's a psychological thing, but again, that gun doesn't care how you feel. It's a machine. It does what it does. A lot of women gravitate towards very small guns. We're talking handguns. First of all, a lot of women want to start off with a handgun because it's a small gun. The handgun is the least effective and hardest gun to shoot, period. You can like that or not, but that is what it is. You look at the power of most rifles, shotguns versus handguns, it's apples and oranges. Handguns are far less effective. We carry handguns, like I have a handgun on my hip right now at the laundromat on my day off because I got to do laundry. And I don't really have the time to hand wash stuff right now. We live as nomads, my wife and I. But anyway, I have a handgun on my hip because that's what I can have on me. When I go in the laundromat, the handgun's what I can have on me. That's why we have handguns. In the world of handguns, because that's where a lot of women start, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but it just is. A lot of women gravitate towards small handguns. And again, that handgun is a machine. It doesn't care how you feel. And I think after many years of thinking about this and looking at this, I think psychologically, women, you're less intimidated by a smaller gun because of the very fact that it's smaller. But physics don't care how you feel. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If I have two firearms chambered in an equal caliber, 9mm is the de facto defensive caliber of our time in handguns. Again, like it or not, it is what it is. If I have two handguns in 9mm, one a full, you don't have to know this, but one a pretty big full-size handgun, like a Glock 17, you don't have to know what that is. And one, very similar, a Glock 43, a very small 9mm handgun. Just picture one being about 4 times the size. And I put them both on the table and somehow I pull the trigger. Which one of those firearms is going to fly back farther on the table? Think about that logically. The little one. The little one is going to fly back far more than the big one. Because it's the same caliber, the same power. Now there's things with barrel length and stuff like that, but let's not get into the minutia. The small handgun is going to fly back farther. It's going to have a far more violent reaction when that trigger gets pulled because it has less weight, less mass. So again, women, if you're looking at handguns, if you don't need a smaller gun for carry, then most of the time, there are exceptions like some gun just bites your hand or gives you a bloody hand because it just interfaces with your body mechanics in an odd way. But barring that, a small handgun is going to be harder to shoot for a lot of reasons, but it's also going to have more punishing recoil. In general, again, in general, there are exceptions. So don't gravitate towards a small handgun. Gravitate towards a larger handgun, assuming it doesn't have some weird oddity that interferes with how you shoot it. I know emotionally and psychologically you may want a smaller handgun because it's less intimidating when you look at it. But in fact, in actuality, and like this or not, but I've noticed in my time here on this earth, women tend to be more emotional creatures, which is a good thing sometimes or a bad thing other times, just like I talked about men. Men tend to a lot of times react with, I'm going to muscle this thing, I'm going to testosterone it into submission, which sometimes is great if you're trying to beat a dude into submission or trying to loosen a rusty bolt, but sometimes the wrong reaction. Women tend to make emotional decisions, but that gun does not care how you feel. That smaller gun is not going to be nicer to you because it's smaller. It's going to be harder to control. So keep that in mind, just because I've seen that as a common thing. Again, not always, but a common thing in women. And I think many times just because it hasn't been explained to you in a logical manner like that. So keep that in mind. Now, there is this paradox with carry handguns. I carry a full-size fighting handgun. Many, even men, do not. They carry these little teeny micro 9s, which I think that's more of an expert's gun. But anyway, there is a paradox in that larger handguns are easier to shoot in general, and smaller handguns are harder to shoot. I don't care how good you tell me your 365 is to shoot, and it's pretty good for a small handgun. A bigger handgun, a bigger full-size handgun with comparable features is going to be easier to shoot. Period. I don't care if you like it or not, unless there's some weird anomaly with your hands or something, like you're a really, really small guy or really, really small woman or something like that. In general, the bigger the handgun, the easier it is to shoot. So ask yourself, if you're even going to carry it first, and I don't recommend handguns for home defense, but many women choose those, right? If it's for home defense, you don't need a small handgun. In fact, it's the opposite of what you want for pretty much every reason. So think about that. Also, women generally carry purses, and I don't even really know the difference between a purse and a handbag or whatever, but you carry these things that allow you to carry bigger things. And again, if you have small children and stuff, I'm not telling you to carry your handgun in a purse, but if not, and a lot of women dress in such a manner as they're really not going to hide a handgun of any shootability in any kind of place. Then you can dress around the gun, and I encourage you to do that if you want. But if you're going to carry it in a purse, you can carry a pretty big handgun. If you are going to carry it on you, again, you get into that handgun carry paradox where bigger handguns shoot much better. They drive a lot faster, have more capacity in general, but they are harder to shoot. Small handguns are easy to carry, but harder to shoot, and that's that paradox. So you gotta balance that for yourself. So, ladies, if you have zero or very little handgun experience, like somebody took you out to shoot a handgun once, that is what it is. But if you want to take it to the next step, I would encourage you, and men, listen to me here too. Man, if you want a woman to get into shooting, and I love my wife, and people have paid me a lot of money in the past to teach handgun shooting. You heard the bio. I don't want to get into that, but I'm blessed to be a very good handgun shooter and have a lot of experience. And I love my wife, but there's a different dynamic. Here's my advice to you men. If there's a woman in your life and you want her to be into guns, carry a gun, pay somebody else to teach her if you at all can afford it. Somebody that's just pay for like an hour of instruction at an indoor range. Even if that person's not as good an instructor as you. I don't even care about that. It's not even about that. It's about the dynamic and the relationship and a woman not wanting to look foolish or it's just a different dynamic. Pay somebody else to teach your wife, your niece, your cousins, uncles, gardener, whatever female you want to be into shooting, pay somebody else to do it. And I generally don't like indoor ranges or an outdoor range if you can find one that rents guns, but pay somebody else for an hour of instruction and have her try a couple of different guns. Don't do this thing where you buy a gun for her and are like, here's your gun, I'm going to take you out and shoot it. One, there's a kind of a bonding period where when somebody chooses something for themselves, they're more likely to actually use it and have some kind of connection with it. So pay somebody else to take a couple of guns out and have them shoot them. That's my advice. Ladies, this is for ladies. If you don't have a man in your life that's trying to get you into shooting and you want to do it on your own, and I don't mean that like facetiously, I mean that's fantastic. I am super happy about that. I want all kinds of women armed. Women sadly are often the victim, and I want to keep this family friendly, of men trying to use their bodies without consent. They're more likely to be the victim of a violent crime. If we had more women armed, and many times when a man went to go do that, they got 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, there'd be a lot less men running around doing that. And that's the kind of world I'd rather live in. I don't want men running around doing that. Not to my wife, not to my nieces. I don't have a daughter, but certainly not if I had a daughter, right? So good on you if you want to take that step and you don't really have any man in your life to do it. You don't need a man to do this. You can get a man as an instructor, but there are plenty now women instructors. If you want, you can find a woman instructor, and that just depends on the woman and the man and the dynamic. Certainly you could learn from a man, and I could certainly learn from a woman. If there was a woman teaching a class and she was a really good shooter, I would have no problem. Again, because you don't need a ton of testosterone to shoot a handgun well. You like that or not, men, you don't. So, women, you can find a female instructor if you want. And get some instruction. Have them talk to you about guns, and maybe a way that they'll explain it that you may identify with more than how I've explained it. Go pay for an hour of instruction. Maybe it's a man, maybe it's a woman, maybe you don't care. But if you want a woman, you can probably find one that will teach you, that will show you. The last firearm and gun company that I managed, we had several females that would teach people how to shoot and women how to shoot. So, again, if you want to get a female instructor, go ahead. If you want to get a male instructor, my advice is get one that's not connected to you in any kind of relationship. It's just a different dynamic. And go out and try some different things. And this episode is already longer than I thought it was going to be. I'm not going to get different calibers and certain specific things for women and all that. This is just kind of getting you started down the path. When you go get that instruction, that person will probably explain to you the difference between a 22 and a 9mm and a 38 special and revolvers and semi-autos and all those things, all those nuances. But first of all, you have the right. I don't know who you are, but most women, you have the ability. I would say pretty much any woman alive on the earth, not knowing the future, may have the potential need for a firearm to defend oneself if you're willing to defend yourself with deadly force. And I guess the big question is, are you willing to take on the responsibility? Because there is a responsibility, I think, that should go with owning a firearm for men or women. If the answer is yes, then this episode might get you down that path. And if it does, again, I think the more responsibly armed women in our society and culture, the better. Men too, but I do a lot of shows that I think the majority of listeners are men. So for women and for men that you want to share this with a woman, and feel free to share this. This is meant to be shared. Right? It's free. It's a free resource. It's not free for me to do and put out, but it's free for you to listen to. Share it. Share it with somebody, please. Wives, nieces, cousins, whatever I said, your next door neighbor's tax attorney's gardener, that's a woman that wants to get into shooting, that's mentioned to you something about it because she saw your Black Rifle coffee mug or something, I don't know. You get the idea. Share it. It's meant to be shared. Blessings are meant to be shared. If you thought this was valuable, share it. I'm not even going to talk about how to support the show in other ways financially today. I'm just going to say, share this episode with somebody you think it will benefit. With that, your tactical tip of the day. It's called a handgun. It's not called the hands gun with an S. Now, normally today, you will shoot most of the time two-handed. It's more control, more body mass behind the gun. But don't neglect your one-handed shooting. There are many scenarios, and one of the few things that a handgun is better at in that you can shoot it, and if you're practiced, shoot it well one-handed. Not as well as two-handed, but pretty well one-handed. And there are many practical scenarios where one may have to shoot one-handed. You're on 911 with the other hand. You're holding a baby with the other arm. Your other arm has been shot or is being held behind your back and you're getting your head beaten into the pavement. There are many scenarios where you may have to fire one-handed. So don't neglect practicing your one-handed shooting. A lot of people, I think, do, and especially their offhand, weak hand. If you're right-handed, that'd be your left hand. Practice that, too. Don't just practice what you're good at. Practice what you think logically you should practice. Your tactical verse of the day. I usually do a tactical verse of the day. This one's going to be about a woman who used deadly force with a weapon. It's from Judges 4:21. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Case study there, women, you can use deadly force. With that, thank you for listening and have a blessed day.